OLX Autos gives the best price for your car.
Good evening and welcome. You're watching the Newstrack. I'm Rahul. Kanwal, the big Agni Pariksha of the Agnipath scheme. Massive nationwide protest. Students out in the streets in Bihar, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana and elsewhere. Those details coming up on the Newstrack tonight.
Trains torched. Kids terrorized. Public paralyzed. Riots raging. Concerns legitimate, but is this acceptable? Is the political divide adding fuel to this blaze? Time to educate, not aggravate. Agnipath anger, now anti-India anarchy.
For the third straight day, anger over the Agnipath scheme continued to boil over. Angry aspirants resorted to arson, violence, vandalism. At least 8 trains were torched in Bihar. Young adults were terrorized as they were stranded in the middle of the protest. The concerns about the Agnipath scheme may be legitimate, but how can burning of trains, this vandalism, this goon-like behavior be acceptable?
After Army's Agnipath recruitment scheme was announced, protests, arson, vandalism continue across the country. Angry aspirants stormed the railway station at Balia in Uttar Pradesh and set fire to a train station there. This after breaking shops and benches while they engaged in violent clashes with the police. Protesters also burned train coaches and tires and raised slogans against the government in Buxar and Prayagraj. Buses were torched and cars were smashed on the Yamuna Expressway in Tapal as vehicles were stuck, leading to a massive traffic jam. Bihar, which witnessed some of the worst violence and arson in the last 2 days, continued to simmer.
The violence is being reported at many places, and railway stations, trains are emerging as the soft target. And here you can see live pictures here that how this train, the Ara Patna passenger train, is burning here. It has been set on fire and only goes on to show the situation on the ground.
In Samastipur, an entire train was reduced to ashes. At least 9 trains were torched across the state, including in Begusarai, Lakhisarai, Buxar, Ara and Danapur.
दानापुर के प्लेटफॉर्म नंबर 3 पर और जहां पर खड़ी है ये फरक्का एक्सप्रेस, जो जिसके 3 बोगी पूरी तरह से जलकर खाक हो चुके हैं। आग लगाने की वजह से देखिए एक ब्रेक वाहन और गार्ड का और उसके बगल का एक जो हम कह सकते हैं कि स्लीपर क्लास है वो बोगी जल गई है।
Even kids were not spared. A school bus was stuck in Darbhanga due to the protest. BJP netas have also been facing fury over Agnipath in Bihar. Protesters pelted stones at Bihar Deputy Chief Minister's residence in Betia. In Madhepura, BJP office was set on fire. National capital Delhi was also on edge. Left-back students hit the streets against Agnipath, demanding that the scheme be immediately revoked.
आज जो 4 साल के लिए कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पर युवाओं को भर्ती की जा रही है, गुलाम बनाया जा रहा है, उसके खिलाफ हम हैं। हमारी मांग है कि इस योजना को वापस लिया जाए, परमानेंट भर्ती की जाए।
Cops resorted to lathi charge in Narnaul district of Haryana. Internet services were snapped in Pallabgarh. The last 48 hours saw Agnipath fury rage across North India. But on Friday, the fire spread to the south. Big flames and plumes of smoke were seen erupting from trains at the Sikandrabad railway station as angry aspirants resorted to arson. At least one person was dead and local police fired 17 rounds in defense.
We are prepared for Indian Army, madam. From 4 years there is no recruitment, there is no selection, and again now the scheme new entry TOD has implemented. Our exam has been cancelled.
The backlash prompted the centre to raise the age limit for Agnipath military recruitment scheme to 23 from 21 for the current year. Will this be enough to douse the fire, or will the recruitment scheme be smoothened out further? Bureau Report, India Today.
Who is fueling the Agnipath fire? The BJP is accusing the opposition of misleading India's Jawans, fanning misinformation about the new recruitment scheme. The opposition is alleging that the protests are proof of the fury of India's unemployed.
The fearsome Agnipath fire is getting bigger and hotter, with dharnas intensifying into all-out riots and acts of criminal damage to national property. But alongside unemployment woes and a storm of misinformation, politics is flowing thick and fast. With the raging rampage being seen as an opportunity to attack the Modi government. The Congress, already on the streets for Rahul Gandhi, has been forced to deploy its guns for the much more ferocious Agnipath protest.
सरकार क्यों ये नहीं कहते कि हम सैलरी और पेंशन देते नहीं सकते? सैलरी और पेंशन देते हुए हमारे वित्तीय हालत बदतर होते जा रहे हैं। इसलिए हम ये पैसा बचाने के लिए हमारा अगले पीढ़ी के जो नौजवान फौज में भर्ती होना चाहते हैं, उनकी भविष्य को लेकर हम छेड़खानी कर रहे हैं।
The Trinamool has also leapt in.
It's a serious matter. Government took a decision on their own. I think it's an ill-conceived program. It will not be acceptable. We shall raise the matter when Defence Consultative Committee meeting comes up.
Bihar, where the violence has been maximum, has seen an even bigger political flashpoint with the BJP's partner JDU.
हमारी पार्टी ने, which is a ruling party in Bihar, और NDLI है, हमने सरकार से मांग की है कि इसको रिव्यू किया जाए और जो यूथ के जो सेंटिमेंट है उनको ध्यान में रखते हुए इनसे बात की जाए।
With train after train burning in Bihar, Lalu Prasad's RJD has called Bihar Bandh on Saturday, sparking a vicious retort from the centre.
ये राजनीतिक दलों के लोगों ने विद्यार्थियों को ढाल बना करके राष्ट्रीय संपत्ति का जलाने का काम किया, बर्बाद करने का काम किया। मैं तो कह दिया कि वहां आरजेडी के गुंडे करा रहे हैं।
But the opposition, usually pulling in different directions, has found itself united by the Agnipath fire. From the NCP to the Akali Dal to Owaisi's AIMIM and even Kapil Sibal, there's a united front against the government over Agnipath. The ruling BJP isn't stepping back though, giving fire to fire on the flaming political battlefield. Linking the farmer stir to Agnipath agitation, UP BJP chief and State Minister Swatantra Dev Singh said the opposition first incited Kisans and now they are inciting Jawans. Big guns from the centre are firefighting with facts and trying to stay away from the political blaze.
केंद्र सरकार द्वारा घोषित की गई अग्निपथ योजना भारत के नौजवानों को देश की रक्षा व्यवस्था से जुड़ने और देश की सेवा करने का एक सुनहरा अवसर देता है। अग्निवीर हूं, यह उनकी ताजिंदगी के लिए पहचान बन जाती है।
ठंडे मन से 46,000 अग्निवीर एक साल, उससे अगले साल फिर 46,000, हर साल 46,000।
The government's other big guns have also been deployed to douse the rage.
तो उसको पहले साल 4,70,000 का तनख्वाह मिलेगी, चौथे साल जाके बढ़ते बढ़ते 6,92,000 हो जाएगी। तो औसतन 4 साल में लगभग 20 लाख रुपए उसको सैलरी से मिलेगा। बाकी फौज की सुविधाएं अलग हैं, जो आपको रहना, खाना, पीना, सर्विस करना वो सारा अलग है।
But the sheer spread of the Agnipath rage has ensured the political fire won't be going out soon. Bureau Report, India Today.
Protests against the government's Agnipath scheme intensifying. It could potentially get worse from here. The critical question now, how do we address the concerns of these youngsters who are out on the streets, agitated, frustrated, burning trains, setting tires on fire, smashing vehicles, completely unmilitary-like behavior this, but yet insisting that they want a job in the services. What's the way forward? Joining us on this broadcast, I want to welcome first and foremost Colonel Rajyavardhan Singh Rathore, former military man, member of Parliament of the Bharatiya Janata Party, sharpshooter, sharp talker, so he'll give us a sense of why he, from a political-military perspective, thinks that this scheme is a good idea. With us also is one of the well-known faces among the veteran community on television, General G.D. Bakshi. With us is Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. He's a distinguished fellow at the Center for Land Warfare Studies, or CLAWS. We've got, from a political opposition perspective, Wing Commander Anuma Acharya, spokesperson of the Congress. And with us are young army aspirants from 2 towns in Bihar, from Muzaffarpur and from Ara. We've got these young aspirants who are part of the protesters who will join us and talk about their frustrations and anxieties. I want to go across to Colonel Rajyavardhan Singh Rathore first. Did the government in any way anticipate this kind of a blowback from these protesters? We're seeing trains being burnt in Bihar and elsewhere. Very disturbing pictures. These, why according to you is this happening? Who's responsible for this? Is this just agitated students or some kind of a conspiracy? And what do you think is the way forward from here?
So Rahul, let's just take a step back and consider the first question, which is the institution in India which we are most confident about. Undoubtedly, it's the armed forces of the country. Number one. Now, when the armed forces of the country, after having 2 years of great amount of debate and discussion with the experts, considering whatever is happening in the world around, try and solve some key problems of the armed forces. Number one being the average age of the armed forces going from 32, 35, and the Indian armed forces not remaining young is a one key issue. Second is the modernization of the armed forces and the finances not being available, a large amount of finances going for the salaries aspect. These two issues, especially when the army comes up with a solution, an institution that is the most respected, and comes and announces a new scheme which is already been tried and tested in many countries, the question is, why is the opposition speaking against it? 2 days. It's been merely 2 days, and the opposition has already understood. They're experts. They've already understood, digested, and come up against the armed forces decision. How ridiculous is that? Now, this, I'm sure your experts who are there in the panel will also be speaking on it. The new scheme ensures bringing down the average age of a soldier to 26. It ensures that the recruitment from earlier times to now goes 3 times higher. So the number of people who would normally be recruited, 1, now there will be 3 more recruits coming in. This recruitment number goes up. Number 2, the large number of people who would get an opportunity to serve the country as Agniveers, 25% of them would be retained in the army, which is the best of the best would be retained in the armed forces, which is again great for the armed forces. And those who go out are going out at the age of 24 with having been trained by none other than the Indian Armed Forces, the best organizations.
So, Colonel Rathod, you're saying what you are,
which anyone can pay.
In different parts of the country, there are youngsters who are clearly not convinced. Why is it that you haven't been able to convince them that this scheme is in their best interest? Because the way that they're seeing it is that their pensions, which were guaranteed if they would join the services, are now no longer guaranteed. 75% of them will no longer have access to pension. 25% will. And the manner in which the scheme was rolled out, big bang, shouldn't this have been done possibly in phases with pilot projects where people saw the benefits of the scheme before it was scaled up?
Now, that's a good question, Rahul, and let me answer that by saying that the 3 chiefs announced it having thought about it for 2 years, number 1. Number 2, the Prime Minister has his ear to the ground, and immediately he announced yesterday night that because of the last 2 years having gone in COVID and Corona, there wasn't enough recruitment happening for the armed forces, and therefore those youngsters who lost out on that opportunity should also be included. So he enhanced the age this time from 21 to 23 years. So the government is solving issues for the armed forces as well as for the youth of the country. Now, who are the people who've completely understood and completely digested and also given out instructions, or rather, let me say, have spoken to the press and said, oh, this is so wrong? Experts from the opposition. They've understood like this, like in a jiffy. Everything's been happening. Now, haven't we all been speaking somewhere or the other, Rahul, and I know you and I have also spoken on many occasions, that there should be conscription in the country. Every youngster should go through the armed forces. We've all at some point of the time spoken about this, and now when we are coming closer to something like that, the opposition says, oh, this is useless. 4 years of training by the armed forces, and then even if they go out with a handsome package, a 24-year-old going out with an approximate 20 lakh rupees, getting in a priority to go into CRPF, BSF and other forces. Or if he wants to do higher education, he gets that opportunity as well. He gets preferential loans. So which 24-year-old right now in any of the villages has this ability? Which 24-year-old has this ability? They are spending money for their courses. And here, they are being given money for an experience which they can get from nowhere else.
You are questioning the role of the opposition in understanding in 2 days what took the services 2 years to orchestrate and to structure. Anuma Acharya, the fact is that at the end of 4 years of military service, even if you don't get an extension, you come out much stronger as a personality than you would have been if you didn't have this exposure. Colonel Rathod linking it to conscriptions. Don't think of it as compulsory military service, but these youngsters will then be set for life in terms of discipline, punctuality, their character, their physical fitness, their mental state. They would be much stronger than they would have been had they stayed on in their villages and towns.
Rahul, when Colonel Sir was talking about it, I could now understand where it is coming from. So it is coming from Startup Nation. That is a book written by Dan Senner and Saul Singer, and this book was written in 2009, and it is about Israel's economic growth, and because of that they could prove that 63 companies were listed as Nasdaq. So this is coming from there, from a country of 7.1 million people, and you are superimposing that model in a country of 1,200 million people, or a Singapore model. You are trying to grow apples in Delhi. Even if you want to do that, then please make the soil fit for that. Have some kind of an environment control over there and consistency. So that all has not happened. You are trying to superimpose that model of Israel on us in a country where
but this is not just... No, one second. I did some research on this. The data is out on the screen right now, whether it is the United States, where a lot of people come in for a 4-year service, or it is a country like Israel, countries like the United Kingdom and several others. Russia, for example, has a similar model of conscription and contract recruitment. Conscripts serve 1-year term and then are put into reserve. So it's not something which Colonel Rathore and the BJP dreamt up. It's something which has been done elsewhere. The average age of the Indian Army is currently in the mid-30s, which is a bad idea given the kind of challenges we face in terms of terrain in China and in Pakistan. Reducing the age to the mid-20s is the right thing to do, madam.
Rahul, please understand what patchwork has already started in this scheme. What the Colonel Rathore has said, as Prime Minister has his ears on ground, it's the huge sound of vote shifting, and that is where the patchwork has started. And let me tell you that this is not going to work in India. The timing is so poor and bad, where China is already invaded us. It has come so far. Then we have a fragile economy of Pakistan and Sri Lanka around us. They can always play rogue. So this is not the time. You can't use armed forces as a guinea pig. And what is it for combat effectiveness or just to reduce the pension bill? That's to be understood. And here, if it is for combat effectiveness, your effective availability of that person who has been inducted is just for 2.5 years, because out of that, he will definitely get 60 days and 90 days of leave, as is applicable to present soldiers. So what are we doing? He will be available.
Let Colonel Rathore respond to your charge that this is essentially being done to reduce the pension liability. That there is this thing that because of OROP, the pension budget of the armed forces is ballooned to about 7,200 crores, an aggregate of about 42,000 crores. You want to reduce that liability, and therefore you have come out with this elaborate scheme. And this impacts the functional fighting capabilities of the armed forces, because these soldiers are effectively available for under 3 years.
Is that question
Colonel Rathore
posed to me?
Oh, is that to me, Rahul?
Yes, Colonel Rathore.
Oh yeah, thanks, Rahul. Thank you, Rahul. I'm happy you raised that point, Rahul, of where an average age of 35 is now coming to mid-20s. Now, another point that I must mention here, that it's not about getting old. It's not just the age. It's also the risk-taking ability. This Indian Armed Forces is not a decorational force. It is not for only marching on the 26 January on Rajpath. It's a fighting force. It is the cutting edge. It's the last call for a nation. It's when you want to annihilate your enemy. It needs risks. It needs a dynamic force. And that is why we need to bring that age down, where a youngster will be able to take that risk in a jiffy. And that is how this nation will remain protected. Now, this is not just about, this is the most useless way of looking at something that the Indian Armed Forces has thought of for 2 years. And the opposition says, oh, it's for reducing the bill. Now, undoubtedly, it's going to modify and modernize the Indian Armed Forces. It's going to bring down that age, which is so vital, which I just mentioned. But imagine now, visualize 10 years from now, when some of the Agniveers, the best of the best, will remain in the armed forces. How good the armed forces will become. And those who will go out, imagine they'll go to CRPF, BSF, they'll go to police. It'll be an extension of the armed forces. When there'll be an opportunity for the armed forces to integrate with the civilians, it'll be a very united force. Also remember, these Agniveers, every village in India will have 2 to 3 Agniveers in 15 years from now. What a fantastic disciplined force the country will have. It's improving the society, it's improving the national security, it's improving the armed forces. Okay. It is giving a 24-year-old the best platform it can be in India.
Okay, I've got some data over here. This is from the ex-servicemen department, which looks at registration and placement of ex-servicemen over the last 10 years, which essentially says for the year in which data is last available, 37,852 ex-servicemen registered for jobs, 3,800 were placed in the central government, 4,700 in state governments, 4,199 in private sector, and a total of 12,800 odd were placed out of 37,000 who applied. So less than 1/3 got employment. This is the past track record, which is possibly why some of the aspirants are wary, because in the past servicemen have struggled to find jobs after retiring. But now you've got the government saying that they will be given priority. But priority was given, General Bakshi, even earlier. Does the prioritization change? You went on record on Twitter to say that you were quite disturbed by this scheme and that you had various concerns about it. You're hearing from Colonel Rathore and from the government. Can you lay out for our viewers what your principal concerns are? Why do you think that Agnipath, in the way that it is structured currently, could be deeply problematic?
Right. First of all, Rahul, since you've called me over, I'd like to start with a major caveat. All this burning of trains, all this burning of buses, destruction of private property, please, I would appeal to the youngsters, don't do it. If you want to disqualify yourself for the armed forces, this is the way to do it.
Sure.
We need disciplined soldiers, not Reuters. Don't make that mistake of being misled by people into ruining any chances of your coming into the armed forces, because your record will be checked. Any police cases against you will disqualify you. So please stop this. This is not the way to protest. Yes, I, as an ex-serviceman, as a veteran with 37 years in the army, did have certain reservations. The right way is to go to the serving colleagues now, discuss it out with them. I've just had about hours plus of discussion with some of my serving colleagues who were responsible to carry this out. Now, it's always been my principle that the responsibility is of the man today. But it is also my duty to share with him my 37 years of experience and whatever little advice, warning, etc., apprehension I can share with him.
So what are your principal concerns? What are the issues you raised? Why do you think that this could go wrong?
So the reservations, yes. The reservations are like this, that traditionally for the last 250 years, the Indian Army has had an ethos of full color service, all volunteer army, right? World War I, World War II, all the wars after independence, we fought, we've done well, less 62, when there was political interference. So when we have an across the board change of culture, then the management of change may require you to carry out a pilot project first and then go ahead with the main scheme, because you are creating a paradigm shift and across the board transformation. You have to manage this degree of cultural change, and you've already seen the kind of misperceptions that can happen, which is leading to a lot of mayhem across the country, which is being exploited for the wrong reasons. So that's my first apprehension, which I have shared with my colleagues. And the second apprehension, which I have again shared, is the simple fact that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has put certain question marks on short-term inductees. There they are conscripts, here they will be volunteers, but nevertheless they will have short-term induction spans. And in those short-term inductees have not done well, have performed very poorly on the battlefield. So if there is a lesson to be learned, well, we need a bit of caution. Instead of just criticizing, I have also some suggestions how it could be taken forward. I would strongly recommend, I would humbly request the powers that be, the government, and I would give this unsolicited advice to my professional colleagues who are now serving, that if you increase this to 7 years, you solve most of the problems that have been raised against this. Most of the problems will be resolved. When I joined the army and we fought the 71 war, the color service of the Jawan was 7 years, and it was designed to keep the army young. You know how well we did in that war. I'm saying go back to that war.
General Sharma, do you agree with that?
4 years,
you think that's a good idea? Increase it from 4 to 7 and you'd achieve the same outcome with much lesser blowback?
Thank you, Rahul, for inviting me. Now, the first issue is that not been addressed is that there is an important underlying foundation of the whole scheme, which is optimization of the force and optimization of combat power. Indian Armed Forces are not meant as Manrega. We are not an employment guarantee scheme. Over the last 3 years, if you follow, there has been a concept of IBGs, etc., which was all moving towards downscaling or downsizing the army to a manageable level, a figure which has been worked out, which probably is not known to us. So there is an issue of management of force and the optimization of force to get across to start doing some modernization. How can you have an infantry unit having 4 types of rifles and you have no capacity to buy anyone? So, you have to do an optimization. The larger exercise is optimization of force. That having said, second is that the army has a large North Indian bias. From historical onwards, we have left the central belt and the South India unaddressed. So there is a need of having an all India, all-class composition, and these were rightful demands of people in the central belt and South India that you are not addressing us. So that is a very important issue to be addressed. Having said that, let me put it this way, that there are 2 issues. If I think we address it, the scheme will be successful and it will move forward. It's an excellent scheme. It's a fantastic financial package put across. If you study the total package, including insurance, how insurance is paid, including on, after he leaves the armed forces, the amount of money he gets from the bank, very good package across. 2 issues. One, the people who applied in a notification of 2019 and 2020 and who some of them had come through and got approved but could not join because of COVID are today left in some kind of a problematic situation. Now, these are our boys. They are people who are our kith and kin. They have the aspiration. The parents may have celebrated a party having been approved. Some people may have passed half of it and half left out. And they would have been told, okay, the balance will take place later. If these people need to be addressed, you just cannot leave your own kith and kin outside saying that no, bad luck, COVID came, so your selection is gone away. A commitment is made by the armed forces towards these boys. Okay, we will take you in. We can't leave them in this form. This 2 years increase helps, but 2 years increase also implies that you have to now join under a new notification. We need to address these people. People, it can be a lakh and maybe more than a lakh, which will be suffering. Till the time this thing is assuaged for this lakh plus people, they will be kind of agitation.
Colonel Rathore, let me put that question to you. This idea that those who suffered because of the pandemic should be given the opportunity to be brought in. A lot of the people who are most agitated are those who got through but never got observed because of the pandemic, and that was beyond their control.
Now, I trust the armed forces for coming up with any of the solutions to various categories. I am not aware if somebody's been completely selected, joining certificate being given. I don't think so. I am certainly aware that there were half of the examination was conducted. For example, the physical examination was conducted, but the written examination and the medical was not conducted. And then there's been a long time lapse. Now, if you think it from the point of view of the armed forces, I believe that 2 years or 1 year is a long time. Physical fitness can change, medical conditions can change, and therefore, if the armed forces think that one has to go through the full complete test again, then I trust them for their judgment. Now, these are things, nitty-gritties that are best left for the armed forces to consider and then come up with a rule for various different categories.
Okay.
I would also like to make a mention here that
Go on.
Sorry?
Go on.
Yeah, I would also like to make a mention here that the Indian Armed Forces already has a short service commission for the officers, and it's been going on 5 years minimum. And that has helped the Indian Armed Forces overcome the shortage of officers with good officers. And therefore, this is a tried and tested method for within India as well, not just in the foreign nations. And of course, I'm sure the armed forces would have had all the data that they need in terms of people who would serve for short duration, who would be trained within the army environment with the ethos and spirit of the armed forces, and then further selected to remain in the Indian Armed Forces. And so I trust the Indian Armed Forces decision.
I want to go across now to Muzaffarnagar. We have Sanjay, Uttam and Ashish joining us from there. In Ara, we have Lalchand Pandey. He's a teacher. Aditya and Bhaskar are joining us. So let me go across first to Muzaffarnagar and understand from those students that ये जो तस्वीरें देश भर में देखी गई जिसमें ऐसे छात्र जो कि फौज में आना चाह रहे हैं वो बसों को जला रहे हैं, ट्रेन को जला रहे हैं। मेरे पिताजी फौज में थे। इस तरह की हरकत करके कोई सेना में तो नहीं आ सकता। ये तो मिलिट्री के अनुशासन का उल्लंघन है। इस तरह की हरकत करके कैसे किसी की भर्ती होगी सर? ये क्या हो रहा है?
जय हिंद सर।
बताइए क्यों इस तरह से ट्रेनों को जलाया जा रहा है? इस तरह से अगर ट्रेनें जलाई जाएंगी तो कैसे इस तरह के लोग बोलेंगे कि हमें तो आर्मी में आना है? ऐसे तो आदमी आ ही नहीं सकता। इस तरह का जो आर्मी में आए वो तो दंगाई है।
जी जी राहुल सर, जय हिंद। मैं एक्स आर्मी हूँ और अभी मैं बच्चों को ट्रेन कर रहा हूँ। लेकिन मैं बता दूं कि जो ये प्रोटेस्ट में जो दंगा हुआ, ये तो मैं इसका सरासर निंदा करता हूँ। और मेरे बच्चे उस प्रोटेस्ट में नहीं गए थे। ये उपद्रवी तरह के जो उपद्रव बच्चे किए थे, एक सरासर गलत किए थे। और ये बच्चे वो बच्चे थे जिनको इससे कोई लेना देना नहीं। इसमें हो सकता है कि कोई अराजक तत्व घुसा हो, लेकिन ये बच्चे में इनकी फ्यूचर के बारे में कौन सोचेंगे? ये जो बच्चे, जो ये राइट साइड में मेरे बैठा हुआ है अमन भास्कर, ये आदित्य बैठा हुआ है। अमन भास्कर पिछले 1 साल से आर्मी की रनिंग क्लियर करके बैठा हुआ है। लेकिन ये अभी पिछले 1 साल से ये लखनऊ में एकेडमी के अंदर रिटेन की तैयारी कर रहा है क्लर्क में जाने के लिए। लेकिन इसको अचानक पता चला कि ये सब जो पीछे दिया गया फीस का, वो सब चीज रद्द कर दिया गया। तो ये बच्चा तो उसमें नहीं शामिल था। मैं इस चीज की आपको गारंटी देता हूँ कि मैं जिन बच्चों को देता हूँ उनको व्यवहार, उनको डिसिप्लिन सब कुछ सिखाता हूँ। तो मेरे यहाँ के तो बच्चे उसमें शामिल नहीं थे। मैं इस चीज की गारंटी आपको देता हूँ। लेकिन जो चीज हो रहा है वो गलत हो रहा है। लेकिन इन बच्चों के साथ जो हो रहा है सर, उसको कौन देखेगा? जी सर।
ठीक है, हम मुजफ्फरनगर चलते हैं। संजय, उत्तम, आशीष वहां पे हमारे साथ हैं। ये हमने जो तस्वीरें देखी मुजफ्फरनगर में, बाकी जगहों पे ट्रेनों को जलाया जा रहा है, ये क्या हो रहा है आपके हिसाब से? इस तरह के लोग कैसे कोई सेना में आ सकते हैं? ये तो बहुत गलत हो रहा है और लोग इससे बहुत चिंतित हैं।
बोल लो।
संजय, उत्तम, आशीष, आपको हमारी आवाज आ रही है?
जी आ रही आवाज आ रही है।
ये बताएं, ये ट्रेनें क्यों फूकी जा रही हैं? अगर कोई चाहता है कि आर्मी में घुसे, उसको तो बड़े अनुशासन के साथ चलना चाहिए।
देखिए सही बात है कि जो सरकार ये अग्निपथ लाई है, ठीक है ना, हम लोग भी विरोध करते हैं। पर इस तरह सही बात है कि जब देश सेवा के लिए जा रहे हैं, ठीक है ना, और देश की संपत्ति को नुकसान करना शायद ये सही नहीं है। और हम लोग भी गुस्सा है, पर इस तरह का गुस्सा हम लोग शायद नहीं किए। और हम लोग चाहते भी नहीं कि देश की अगर ट्रेन चलाई जा रही है तो कहीं ना कहीं हम ही लोग का नुकसान हो रहा है। क्योंकि सरकार जो लेती है ये हम ही लोग कहीं ना कहीं से लेती है। और इस तरह देश की संपत्ति नुकसान करना ये सही नहीं है। गुस्सा है, विरोध है, आप विरोध कर सकते हैं, पर इस तरह ट्रेन चलाकर
नहीं। भाजपा के सांसद और पूर्व सेना के कर्नल राज्यवर्धन राठौर हमारे साथ हैं इस वक्त। आपका क्या कंसर्न है? आप उनसे सीधे सवाल कीजिए, क्योंकि इस तरह की स्कीम तो दुनिया के बाकी देशों में है। आर्मी में ऑफिसर्स काडर के लिए शॉर्ट सर्विस कमीशन रहता है। 70 के दशक तक इसी तरह से 7 साल के बाद जो जवान है वो घर जाया करते थे। ये सेना का उस वक्त का नियम था। तो ये कोई नई चीज थोड़ी है, कोई पहली दफा हिंदुस्तान में नहीं हो रही। तो आप लोग इतने क्यों परेशान हैं?
नहीं, परेशान सवाल है कि जो हम लोग मेहनत करते हैं, ठीक है ना, जिस तरह हम लोग मतलब की तैयारी करते हैं, वो रहता है कि मतलब कि 20 साल 25 साल तक हम लोग सेना में सेवा कर सके। और शॉर्ट टर्म सर्विस में क्या होगा कि फिर हम लोग का जो उस तरह का जो मतलब की शक्ति होती है, जो तैयारी का होता है, वो फिर वो डाउन हो जाएगा। अगर करना ही है तो हम इंटर के बाद जिस तरह एनसीसी तैयारी करते हैं, एनसीसी का तैयारी करवाते हैं, उस समय इसको हम जोड़ दें कि बच्चा 21 साल तक मतलब या 22 साल तक मतलब ये करके हट जाए, फिर अपना जॉब ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं ऐसा ही करके। ये मेरा अपना सोच है।
Okay, let Colonel Rathore respond to this point. The concern that was raised in ARA that you had a student who cleared the running exam and therefore in the last 1 year has been staying. अच्छा, आपका भी हाथ आप कुछ बोलना चाह रहे हैं लालचंद पांडे जी, एग्जैक्टली बताइए कर्नल राठौर से आपका सवाल क्या है, क्या चिंता है, क्योंकि इस तरह की स्कीम तो दुनिया के बाकी देशों में भी है। फिर कर्नल राठौर जवाब देंगे।
जी, मैं जय हिंद सर, मैं हवलदार चंदन पांडे, मैं आर्मी के सिग्नल कोर में था। मैं सर राठौर सर से ही मैं पूछना चाहता हूँ कि सर मैं जब ट्रेनिंग किया था एज ए टेक्निकल सोल्जर तो मैं 3.5 साल की ट्रेनिंग किया था गोवा में। उसके बाद मैं जब यूनिट पहुंचा सर, तो यूनिट को समझने में, यूनिट के लोगों को समझने में, बटालियन समझने में, इक्विपमेंट समझने में मुझे कम से कम 5 साल लगे थे। मैं अमृतसर में पहली पोस्टिंग थी मेरी, तो 8.5 साल में मैं तो फौज को समझ पाया था सर। तो ये 4 साल में जो बच्चों को आप बाहर करेंगे, जो ये कानून लेके आए हैं सर, ये तो बेरोजगार हो जाएंगे। ये 3.5 साल 4 साल वहां क्या पढ़ेंगे सर? उसके बाद आएंगे तो ये बाहर क्या करेंगे? तो ये मेरा एक छोटा सा सुझाव है, आप एक मंत्री भी हैं और हमारे सेना के सर्वोच्च अधिकारी भी हैं आप, तो इन बच्चों को री एम्प्लॉयमेंट, जैसे ये जो बोल रहे हैं कि 25% लोगों को आप रखेंगे एज एक्सीडेंट बॉयज, जो लड़के एक्सीडेंट रहेंगे उसमें उनको आप रख लेंगे, जो उसमें से गुड और सेटिस्फैक्ट्री आएगा ना सर। तो मेरा एक छोटा सा आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है, आप इस बात को अगर ऊपर तक पहुंचा दे कि उनमें से बीएसएफ या आईटीबीपी या अर्धसैनिक बल या स्टेट गवर्नमेंट की जो भी वैकेंसी आएगी, इनको प्रायोरिटी में वो एक कानून होना चाहिए कि ये बच्चे वहां से निकलेंगे तो 1 महीने के अंदर जो आर्मी में जा रहे हैं वो 1 महीने के अंदर स्टेट गवर्नमेंट में या अर्धसैनिक बल में ये जाएंगे।
ओके, आपका सवाल उन्होंने सुना। कर्नल राठौर जवाब दीजिए।
जी राहुल, पूरा सवाल इनका तो खैर मैंने सुन लिया। उससे पहले जो बातचीत हो रही थी मुझे बहुत हल्की हल्की आ रही थी, फिर भी मैं जवाब देने की कोशिश करता हूं। अगर मैं सही प्रश्न का जवाब नहीं दे रहा तो आप मुझसे वापस से पूछ लीजिएगा। सबसे पहले तो मैं, शायद कोई डिफेंस एकेडमी चलाते हैं और उन्होंने ये बात कही कि मेरे डिफेंस एकेडमी वाले लड़के नहीं थे इस उपद्रव में। मैं सबसे पहले उन्हें एड्रेस करना चाहता हूँ। देखिए, आप ट्रेनिंग करवाते हैं, बहुत अच्छी बात है, आप मार्गदर्शन कर रहे हैं, आप रास्ता बता रहे हैं इन सभी युवाओं को। आप ट्रेनिंग कराते हैं और ट्रेनिंग के उनसे पैसे भी लेते हैं, उस जायज़ बात है, कुछ गलत नहीं है, आप उनसे पैसे भी लेते हैं। आपकी ट्रेनिंग के बाद जब ये सेलेक्ट हो जाते हैं तो इनको परमानेंट सर्विस मिल जाती है। आपको क्यों लगता है ऐसा कि आपकी दी हुई ट्रेनिंग भारतीय सेना की 4 साल की ट्रेनिंग से ज़्यादा बेहतर है? क्योंकि भारतीय सेना आप इन सिलेक्शन करने के बाद 4 साल तक उनको ट्रेनिंग करवाएगी, उनसे सर्विस करवाएगी और उसके बाद औसतन 4 में से 1 को सेलेक्ट करेगी, तब वो उसको परमानेंट मिलेगा वहां पर। तो आपको ऐसा क्यों लगता है कि आपकी जो ट्रेनिंग है जिसमें आप पैसे ले रहे हैं और भारतीय सेना जो ट्रेनिंग दे रही है जिसमें भारतीय सेना इन नौजवानों को पैसे दे रही है, उसमें आपकी ट्रेनिंग भारतीय सेना की ट्रेनिंग से ज्यादा अच्छी है? तो ये नया सिस्टम है, ये नया सिस्टम और भी इफेक्टिव सिस्टम है, ये भारतीय सेना ने ही सोच के बनाया है। अब मैं उस बच्चे का और हवलदार पांडे जी का जो सवाल है उसका जवाब देने की कोशिश करता हूं। देखिए पांडे जी, आपने बोला कि 3 साल लगे आपको, उसके बाद 5 साल लगे आपको इक्विपमेंट को समझने में। बहुत अच्छी बात है, बिल्कुल सही बात है। और भारतीय सेना ने अभी जो आर्म्ड फोर्सेस ने जो ये योजना लेकर आए हैं अग्निपथ, वो इससे कहां अलग है? 4 साल की ट्रेनिंग है, उसमें उस 4 साल की ट्रेनिंग में जो सबसे अच्छा इक्विपमेंट सीख रहा होगा उसको रखेंगे, सेलेक्टेड बेस्ट ऑफ द बेस्ट को रखेंगे और उसके बाद उसको 5 साल 7 साल 8 साल 15 साल और उसको सर्विस करवाएंगे। तो चेंज कहां है? बल्कि ये ऑप्शन मिल रहा है भारतीय सेना को, आर्म्ड फोर्सेस को, कि बेस्ट ऑफ द बेस्ट को रखा जाएगा। और जिनको ट्रेनिंग दे रही है उनके ऊपर पैसा भी भारतीय सेना खर्च कर रही है, आर्म्ड फोर्सेस खर्च कर रही है, उनको पैकेज दे रही है। और 24 साल की उम्र में, जब वो बच्चा मुझसे पूछ रहा था, 24 साल की उम्र में जब आप जाते हो, पांडे जी भी बोल रहे थे, ये जितनी भी सर्विसेज हैं, सीआरपीएफ, बीएसएफ, सीएपीएफ, जितनी भी हैं, स्टेट की पुलिस सर्विसेज, मध्य प्रदेश ने हाँ कर दी, उत्तर प्रदेश ने हाँ कर दी, उत्तराखंड ने हाँ कर दी, इन सब के अंदर जाने में आपको प्राथमिकता मिलेगी। कौन सा 24 साल का लड़का या लड़की किसी गांव में है जिसके पास इससे ज्यादा बढ़िया अवसर है? तो इसको समझिए, विश्वास करिए, 2 सबसे शानदार लोगों ने इसको तैयार करा। एक तो भारतीय सेना जो आज की सबसे शानदार इंस्टीट्यूशन है और जिसके ऊपर देश का सबसे ज्यादा विश्वास है। ऐसे प्रधानमंत्री दोनों ने मिलकर इस योजना को तैयार करा है। विश्वास रखिए, 2 दिन तो हुए हैं इस योजना को, अभी से ट्रेनें जलानी शुरू कर दी। और किन के भड़कावे में कर रहे हैं? आपके जनरल बख्शी साहब ने बिल्कुल सही बोला, ध्यान रखिए आप सभी, कहीं गलती से कहीं कोई FIR कहीं रिपोर्ट हो गई तो बना बनाया करियर समाप्त हो जाएगा, तो इनके चक्करों में मत पड़िए।
General Bakshi, you're hearing some of these concerns of these students. Their principal fear is that they work hard, go to an academy before coming to the Real Army Academy in the hope that they will then be secure for life. Their fear now is that at the end of 4 years, they'll be back to the same queue, that same uncertainty about whether or not they may get priority, but there is no guarantee about getting a job because 1/3 of the servicemen previously didn't get a job after retiring, so there's no guarantee that will change. Priority is not a guarantee. Havaldar Pandey is saying, give us a guarantee that they'll get employed, otherwise that promise of priority doesn't mean very much.
I think the fears and apprehensions are genuine. They will have to be addressed, and I have a suggestion. Look, for ages we have been saying, when I was in the Military Operation Directorate, 2 tenures, one with your dad, you know, we had been saying the most logical manpower management system in the country is to have a young profile in the army and then let those people go to the paramilitary forces, the BSF, CRPF, ITPP, etc., etc., etc. But that never happened because there were these turf wars. They said we need young people, and the retirement age in the CRPF, CISF is 58. But they didn't want the old timers from the army. So now that the government is saying it will be done, please give it a guarantee in terms of an enactment of parliament. Tomorrow if the government changes, they say, no, we won't take these boys into this thing. 90% of your problems are solved if there is an assured transition from the
Can that transition, before I conclude,
retirement,
be assured? Is that at all on the anvil, or can it be considered, Colonel Rathore?
I'm sorry, Rahul, you'll have to repeat. I couldn't hear this.
An act of parliament.
Can there be an act of parliament which guarantees that as soldiers retire from the army after 4 years, they will necessarily, not on priority, but compulsorily be hired against vacancies in the CRPF, the BSF, the ITBP or any other such service?
Okay, now I'm into a guessing game now. I could barely hear you. But presumably a guaranteed commission into the CRPF, BSF, is that what you're saying?
That's correct, sir.
No, so it's easy for us to sit in a studio or talk on the television and say that, of course, General Bakshi is again right, you know, the armed forces, the soldiers spend so much of time and he feels that they should get their service or their training should be utilized by the country. But again, I would go by the wisdom of those who are currently serving. I would go with their wisdom because the contemporary situation is quite different than what it was earlier. And so, also remember that those of the youngsters who would be trying to get into CRPF, BSF, they could be competitive, right? So let us not take that competitive edge from them. But yes, as the current Agnipath scheme says, as the Home Minister has announced, I correct myself, as the Home Minister has announced that these CAPFs will come up with a policy wherein these Agniveers will get a prioritized recruitment in the CAPF.
So I'm out of town. We were able to cover a lot of ground, get a sense of the concerns of the students, understand a military perspective, understand political perspectives as well. I have a feeling that this story will continue for a while. because there is a lot of students who are agitated. The government is trying its best to calm these students down, tell them why you need a leaner, meaner, fitter army, which is absolutely true. But they have their concerns about security. Those concerns need to be assuaged. General Bakshi had some ideas about raising the cap from 4 years to 7. Could that be a potential solution, which was the case in India in the mid-70s? So we'll track all of this in all its dimensions. The Agni Pariksha of the Agnipath. We're slipping into a quick break. I'll have more for you when I come back on the other side. Stay with us.
India Today Group wins big again. Bags 37 awards at the NT Awards 2022. Ajtak triumphs with 18 awards. India Today TV with 12 awards. Ajtak.in and IndiaToday.in with 5 awards. And Good News Today with 2 awards, making the group proud once again. India Today Group, the gold standard of journalism.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Rajdeep Sardesai. The Agnipath fire is spreading far and wide, with Bihar the epicenter of the protests of angry youth against the government's new recruitment scheme. The politics of it is playing out fiercely now. The big question, should the Modi government dilute or roll back the Agnipath scheme, or stick to its stand of revamping and reforming army recruitment? That's going to be the big political debate on the news today. And plenty of other news from India and across the world on the news today. News without the noise.
You're on board the Newstrack. The Kerala gold scam accused Swapna Suresh continues to level serious charges against Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan. In the latest, she's accused the Kerala Chief Minister of lobbying for his daughter's IT firm in Sharjah.
Under scanner for her role in the gold smuggling case, portions of Swapna Suresh's sworn affidavit is now out in the public domain. She makes startling claims that pins the Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan and his family along with his office in a case of clear abuse of power. Swapna Suresh claims that the Chief Minister of Kerala sought assistance of Sharjah ruler Sultan bin Muhammad Al Qasimi for his daughter Veena to begin an IT company in Sharjah. The alleged favor was demanded during the Sharjah ruler's Kerala visit in September 2017. The proposal was made in a closed-door meeting at Chief Minister's residence, Cliff's house. The Chief Minister was present along with top IAS officer like Nalini Neto and his secretary M. Shivashankar in the meeting with the Sharjah ruler. Swapna claims in her affidavit that the Chief Minister's wife Kamala Vijayan also spoke to Sharjah ruler's wife about their daughter opening an IT company in Sharjah. She claims that because the Sharjah ruler was not favorable to the proposal, it never happened. Swapna Suresh came under the radar of the investigative agencies after a case of 30 kg of gold smuggling from a diplomatic cargo addressed to the UAE Consulate General Office in Thiruvananthapuram came to light in 2020. In her affidavit, she further alleges that in 2016, she was asked by the Chief Minister's Secretary M. Shivashankar to arrange for a parcel mistakenly lost by the Chief Minister in his UAE trip. The parcel was brought to the embassy and the consulate PRO, Sarit, found currency along with some spice kind of images through the consulate scanning machine in the parcel. It was to be sent to an emirate in UAE. Swapna Suresh revealed that the Consul General used to send big vessels of biryani to the Chief Minister's residence. 2/3 of these vessels were purportedly filled with other objects by the Consul General himself before topping it with biryani. The affidavit also names former Minister K.T. Jalil. Swapna Suresh claimed that Jalil brought in consignments like dates and Quran to consulates in other states using a Benami account of Madhavan Warrior. Not only Jalil, Swapna Suresh also names former Speaker P. Sri Ramakrishnan in her affidavit. She claimed that the former Speaker sought help from her to arrange a meeting with the Sharjah ruler to seek land to construct a new college in UAE. P. Sri Ramakrishnan met the ruler in Sharjah and asked for free land to build his educational institute. A resident of Dubai, Swapna Suresh revealed in her affidavit that she has already disclosed these allegations to all the investigative agencies, including the NIA.
This is where we wrap up the Newstrack tonight. I hope that protests subside over the weekend and that things are calm by Monday. We'll track what's happening. Our teams are deployed all across the country throughout the weekend. We'll bring you the latest. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you Monday evening at 8.
Sun, we depend on it for energy and light, but solar flares from the sun could be deadly. Are you confused and don't understand what this means? Don't you worry, we have it covered. A massive solar flare erupted from Earth's star as it got active in its new cycle. A sunspot exploded and produced flares which lasted for 8 hours. The event led to a shortwave radio blackout for 8 hours over Japan and Southeast Asia. Before we get into the technicalities of what caused this, let's learn about solar flares. A solar flare is an intense, localized eruption of electromagnetic radiation in the sun's atmosphere. Its occurrence will disrupt radio signals. The occurrence of solar flare also varies upon 11-year cycle. The solar flare unleashed superheated plasma from the sun, powering them at speeds ranging in millions of kilometers per hour. The growing sunspot AR3032 exploded, producing M3 class flares that lasted nearly 8 hours. It hurled towards the inner planets, including Earth, ionized the top of the atmosphere with the extreme ultraviolet radiation released from the sun. Geomagnetic storms are a major disturbance of Earth's magnetosphere that occurs when there is a very efficient exchange of energy from the solar wind into the space environment surrounding Earth.
You are watching India.
We know that plastic causes pollution, but did you know microplastics can also be a cause of pollution? Microplastics are plastic particles with dimensions less than 5 millimeters. Some are so small, they are invisible to the naked eye. Nylon and polyethylene, for example, are mixture of polymers and additives, are themselves microplastics created from tiny